Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another Stryd Coaching webinar series. As always, my name is Evan here, bringing you another great webinar focused on talking about Stryd, talking about coaching. To give you more information, today we're going to be talking about adapting power-based coaching strategies to individual athletes. We have Tyler and Carly Gugemost from Organic Coaching. How are you guys doing today?
We are excellent. How are you?
Yeah.
Fantastic. It is a good morning to record a webinar and provide some more information for people. So like I said, today we're going to be talking about adapting power-based coaching strategies to individual athletes. We have a topic list and some brief introductions to go through before we specifically dive into stuff. So I will turn the reins over to Tyler and Carly to go through that. They are in control of the slide deck from their side, and they're going to give a great presentation. As always, if you have any follow-up questions based off of this webinar, you can always feel free to email us in at coach@stryd.com, and then we'll provide contact information for Tyler and Carly with the email that goes out with this webinar as well. So I'm going to turn the reins over to both of you, and I'm looking forward to some great information about adapting power-based coaching strategies to individual athletes.
Sounds good.
All right.
Here we go. So some things that we're just going to go over today, of course, are introductions, talking about our personal coaching strategy, athlete adaptability, and then how we really introduce Stryd to athletes, which is a big one. And then, of course, questions and answers at the end. So quick introduction, my name is Carly Gugemost. I have a bachelor's and master's degree in exercise science. When I was in high school, I took an anatomy and physiology class, and basically from that moment on, I knew I wanted to work with the body in some way, shape, or form. But of course, at that time, it was like, you're going to be a nurse or a doctor. And I was like, I don't want to be a nurse or a doctor. So about my senior year of college, senior year of high school, I found out kind of this whole world of exercise science. And that's what I jumped into. And so during my master's degree, I focused all of my efforts, all of my studies, all of my research really around long course triathlon, from training, racing strategies, nutrition, like everything I did was around long course triathlon. So that was a really fun, cool time to really combine passion, education, and all of that together into one. So fast forward, we've both been coaching for 7 years. So I've been coaching for 4 years full time. Previously, I was working in the running industry, and it just really came to this point where I couldn't work my full-time job and coach anymore. Something had to give. So at that point, we had literally nothing to lose. And I jumped into coaching full-time at that point. It was a really tough decision. I loved my job in the running industry. So it was a tough decision, but so glad that I started coaching full-time. And then I'm a triathlete, and everything from Xterra to Ironman racing. My sweet spot is really 70.3 in Ironman racing. I am a horrible Xterra athlete. He laughs because it's true. But it's a ton of fun to get out on the trails and a nice change of pace. So I've qualified for Kona 2 times, 70.3 World Championships multiple times, and the Xterra World Championships as well. And then really a lover of all things coffee and travel. So we found that racing takes us also to amazing destinations. And we've traveled all over the world for races as well, which is a really kind of cool side thing about triathlon and racing.
All right. And I am Tyler Gugemost. I have a bachelor's degree in exercise science, and my journey to a bachelor's degree was different than many people. So straight out of high school, I actually was an auto mechanic, and I worked at a Ford dealer for 5 years, working on cars every day. Carly and I got married. Carly was working on her bachelor's degree, was helping her study at night. And she was kind of getting more into like the bits of exercise science. So she was taking anatomy and human physiology, and I was helping her study. And I was like, wow, this is pretty interesting. And up until that point, I thought I was just going to like work on cars the rest of my life. So I made a pretty quick change and quit the job that I thought I was going to kind of do the rest of my life, and started going to university for the first time ever at the age I was 23 or 24. and ended up getting a exercise science degree with a focus on like really human performance, or as I called it at the time, self-performance, because I was always really interested about what I was learning, how I could apply it to myself. And yeah, I mean, it was really rewarding, and I'm really happy I went that route to land where I am now at coaching. So my coaching approach is really holistic between data and feel. I like to really split the two right down the middle. It's really important for me to have my athletes understand how like their metrics, their zones, so whether it's run power or bike power, or run pace or run heart rate, or bike wattage or swim pace. Those are really important to me, and so is feel. Being able to correlate zones to feel, and being able to correlate field to zones, and being able to look at multiple metrics while you're training and racing really make for a strong, balanced athlete that's going to be able to tackle any situation in a race, which is really the key takeaway. So I put an equal emphasis on feel and numbers to make a strong athlete that we get the best chance of having a great race day, no matter what happens, from a changing conditions midway through the race to a device randomly dropping or not getting the metrics we plan on, which happens from time to time for sure. So I've been coaching for 7 years, just like Carly. I started coaching full-time 5 years ago, partway through college. And then for a year after college, I was working at a bike shop and doing all aspects of working at a bike shop. But my favorite thing to do was fittings. And as I was doing more fittings, I had done an Ironman or two at this point, talking to athletes as we're fitting them for tri-bikes, and, kind of talking about my experiences and everything. And that's kind of how I got my first athlete. And it kind of grew from there, but my first athlete actually came from the bike shop. So that was kind of what started the whole thing. It wasn't something I was necessarily planning on doing, but it kind of rolled into that. And then I'm a triathlete. I like everything from Xterra to Ironman to X-Tri, including 70.3 as well. I do like the more rugged events these days. So Xterra triathlon with mountain biking and trail running, I very much like. And then X-Tris, if you're not familiar, it's an Ironman distance, but you're swimming in nice cold conditions like 50 to 55 degree Fahrenheit water. You're doing 112 miles just like you would in an Ironman, but often a little bit worse of conditions, to say the least. And then the marathon often has mountain stages or really kind of gnarly trail running. So I very much enjoy those. And then when I'm not coaching, I enjoy cooking and traveling. So cooking's always been a side hobby for me. I don't cook for other people. It's more of an experiment weekly with myself. And then travel, like Carly had mentioned, triathlon has taken us so many amazing places, and it's really fun mixing the two. And particularly X-Tris take you to some really remote locations in the world and places that I don't think we would have ever imagined traveling to if it wasn't for them.
Yeah, I have one quick interjection, actually, because I find the journey always, for coaches, especially watching this too, everybody has a unique journey that brings them to the endurance world. And you two both have different journeys to the endurance world. Mm-hmm. When you started coaching, obviously, like you mentioned, it's been about 7 years, and then started, full-time a little bit after that. How have you noticed the endurance world shifting in terms of maybe technology or access to athletes' data? And then have you found any sort of like resources super helpful on your coaching journey when you started? Because Tyler, I imagine the human body is a little bit different than taking apart an engine or taking a look at some struts, or then even if you go to a bike shop and you're working on stuff from a mechanical side, it's different than that human physiology. So were there any sort of resources that you found helpful as you started out, or what has been sort of the transition and sort of growth over time as you've started? Maybe either or of those questions.
Yeah, so I would say first, our education. The education was a huge part, really understanding the human body, and having studied that for a couple of years definitely helped with just a solid foundation that doesn't necessarily translate to right coaching, but it helps you understand the human body and really much more behind what goes into a training plan to really properly adjust and build a plan. Now, changes, we did spend a lot.
A lot of changes from like technology has like leaps and bounds over the last 7 years. It's funny, we were literally joking like 2 weeks ago on how simple technology was when we started, and like we're not that old. It wasn't that long ago. But technology was a lot simpler when we first started in coaching and like getting in the sport ourselves. I don't know.
Yeah, I would say so. It is taken leaps and bounds forward. I mean, we did our first Ironman in 2013, really started kind of doing like triathlon endurance events in 2011. And if I think about what was available then versus now,
we were using Math My Run to like see how far we had ran sometimes, like,
because there was only when we started, it was like the Forerunner 305, which you couldn't even, like, if it was raining outside, you couldn't use it or it would kill it.
Yeah.
So definitely a different world. And I think for like resources, we're lucky that we're in a world of it kind of like unlimited resources. So for us, it's oftentimes drawing towards people who have lots of experience in the sport or devices or ideas that have a lot backing them up, not something that's just come out overnight. We would definitely want to see it in action and see whatever this method or theory is. We don't want our athletes to be experiments. We want it to be tried and true.
Yeah. And I think just kind of piggybacking off of that is like finding a mentor. I wouldn't say there's like one, like go to this resource online, but finding a mentor, someone that you really look up to, is like one of the best things we could have done for ourselves. And not even directly in the sport of triathlon or running or racing, but even like a physical therapist, right? I'm not a physical therapist. I'm not going to pretend to be one, but having that resource to reach out to when something does come up, I think is really important.
Yes.
Yeah, amazing. Let's continue on. Tell us a little bit more about organic coaching, and then we'll get into all of the topics.
Perfect.
Okay. So like we had both kind of mentioned, we started organic coaching in 2014, a side passion that organically happened, but we weren't really looking for athletes or to start coaching. We were both approached by people, and it slowly started to grow pretty steadily. We didn't really put a ton into it to grow it initially because it was just a side thing. It was like for fun, definitely just helping athletes with, reaching their training and racing goals, using our education. We had got a certification at the time, and then our experience. And so, like we said, it both got to a point for both of us where it was just too much. We were working our day job full time, and then we were just coaching around the clock. And we weren't really getting to train a lot, which is something we really enjoyed doing. So that was kind of the breaking point for both of us when we got to that point. Now, fast forward to now, we're a team of 5. So there's Carly and I. We have 2 assistant coaches as well. And then we have a back end like HR person who does like web design and any HR aspect for us as well.
Yeah. And so really sets us apart at organic coaching is we found a niche that we really enjoy working with essentially. And so we really specialize in helping the time crunch, the busy athlete train smarter. And so going back to all of the tools, the technology, the leap and bounds it's made over the years, that's what we can really utilize to help athletes train smarter with the limited amount of time that they have available. And we're all busy. Like you never sit down and have a coffee with someone without them saying like, I'm really busy, lots going on, right? No matter what stage you are in life, like there's always something going on. So really helping athletes utilize that time that they have to fit training in. And again, just train smarter, not harder. It's not about quantity, it's about quality. And then in general, we put a really, really big emphasis on communication, athlete education, and truly enjoying the process. A lot of athletes, when we talk to them, right, there's this big goal of like getting to Kona or a Boston qualification or world championship qualification. That takes a lot of time and it generally does not happen overnight. And so it's really, really important to enjoy the process, the training of getting there, because it's not just going to happen. And if we're not enjoying what we're doing, that's when burnout comes and we're just on to the next thing. So those are the 3 things that we put a lot of emphasis on. So now we're just going to dive into some goal setting, periodization, adaptability, and that ongoing communication and what that looks like for us at organic coaching. So goal setting, this is a big one. So what we first do is just have that initial conversation with athletes. Where are they at? What are their goals? Sometimes it's maybe a more advanced athlete and they're chasing that world championship qualification. Maybe it's a brand new athlete in their midlife, their 40s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and they're like, I've never been active and I just want to finish a triathlon. I just want to finish a 10K, a half marathon, whatever that is. So it's really just meeting the athlete where they're at and seeing what their goals are in that initial conversation. And then once we get a good feel for just where they're at with things, then of course we set A, B, and C races throughout a calendar year, but then we get even more specific, kind of looking at that big race and what they're training for. So let's say it's Ironman race is that main A race of the year. Then we break that down into A, B, and C goals. So our A goal is like the day that everything clicks. We feel like we're swimming with a current, where you're biking with a tailwind, and we're running and we just never feel like we hit the wall, right? Like the day we all pray for happening. So that's our A goal. And so maybe for an athlete, that's like a 10-hour Ironman. And they're like, it'll be amazing if I hit a 10-hour Ironman. And then we have a B goal. So then that's like, well, actually, it feels like we're swimming upstream. It feels like it was all uphill on the bike, and the run, it was like the heat of the day, the hottest day we've had all year. Like that's kind of our B goal of like, if I then hit a 10:45 to an 11-hour Ironman, that would still be a super solid day, right? So this is our B goal. This is where we're still going to be really, really satisfied if this happens. And then our C goal is going to obviously be after that. And we really try to have a C goal not be something that is time related. So no matter what, when we wrap up the race, there's still something to say, we're proud of this. I did a really good job doing this. So some examples of C goals might be, maybe it's an athlete that really deals with a lot of stomach cramping and GI issues. So maybe it's staying on top of nutrition and hydration and not having those stomach cramps or stomach GI issues. Maybe it's just finishing the dang thing and doing it and not giving up mentally. So then we also, again, just have those C goals. And then taking it another step further, we have a really long life. What am I trying to say?
We are like they're not really like one and done. A lot of our athletes work with us for years and years.
Yeah, so athletes stick with us for a long time. Words are apparently hard at the moment. And so we like to set those long-term goals. We really, really love the example of a college degree. You're not going to get a college degree in 1 year. And so it takes 4 years to get that. And so again, going back to that initial conversation, what is that big goal? Again, maybe it's Kona, maybe it's finishing an Ironman. And so depending on where that athlete is at, that long-term 4-year goal, they'll be like, I've never been active a day in my life. I know I'm not going to do an Ironman in 12 months, but my goal is to do an Ironman in 4 years. So having that 4-year goal that we are working towards, and then breaking that down year by year to get there. So then our short-term goals are yearly and making those building blocks to getting to that 4-year, that degree at the end of that. So those are some different ways that we really just break down goal setting for our athletes to make sure we know where we're going. We have to know what the goal is in order to get there.
And then once we've got that, kind of that periodization, we've got those 1-year goals, 4-year out goals, and we take that and we start to map out a plan. And in this sense, we're talking about long-term and short-term in terms of an annual plan. So we make that plan with those races, and then we break it down into blocks, and then we break those blocks down into weeks of training. So for most athletes, we do 3 weeks of building, 1 week of recovery. And that's for most, not all. There are special considerations and a couple examples that we found that worked really good. So first, some older athletes, like athletes who are over 60, we found going to a 2-week build, 1 week of recovery has resulted in much stronger training and better race performances. Now, I have an athlete I'd worked with for a couple of years at this point. We were training for Ironman Florida in 2018. And we had done multiple 70.3s together, but this was our first Ironman. And we were kind of getting into the bigger blocks of training where, there's a lot of volume. And I was finding that weeks 1 and week 2 of the build were strong. Week 3 was turning into more of a survival. And then the recovery week, we would have to often implement even more rest and take volume even lower. So recovery weeks were coming down to like very little training. And that with what was supposed to be a peak week was the athlete surviving it, like getting through it, but nothing great coming from it because they were so beat up. So I switched this athlete to a 2-1, 2 weeks of building, 1 week of recovery. Now, initially, this athlete was really resistant to it because, that third week, it felt like he was just like gutting it out, becoming a better athlete. But really, we weren't, because we weren't able to hit intensities or paces that we needed to. So starting out, he was quite resistant, but I was just really trying to educate him on why we wanted to do it and how it would help him long term. And he started to embrace it more. And so instead of before we were having those 2 weeks of build, 1 week survival, 1 week recovery, we had 2 really quality weeks and then a quality recovery week. So a recovery week we could plan, not really have to modify because he was so beat up, and then get right back into that build. And that athlete ended up having, well, it was his first Ironman, but he had, I would say, a stronger race than he had previously at 70.3s. So that's something we've implemented that has worked extremely well. And then there is always those considerations as well where an athlete's returning from injury or new to the sport. So when an athlete's returning from injury, and depending on what it is, which we work with primarily triathletes, we do work with some runners and cyclists, but most are triathletes. They might have a swim injury, something with a shoulder, or they might have a run injury. And so we can't do that sport, or we can't do that sport at the intensity. So sometimes we're periodizing just one sport. We're doing a normal 3 week of building, 1 week of recovery. But within that, the run, for example, if they're returning from a run injury, we might be doing much shorter builds and recoveries to make sure they're returning properly. And this is where Stryd has been great. They've lost some fitness from running, for example. They can't hit these efforts, these paces they did before. And so we have them focus on power. Well, we're going to do run walk intervals at this wattage, and we're just focused on wattage. We're not worried about pace. And that way it pulls them away from maybe numbers they had really held on to before, so they don't get discouraged. They still have a goal, and a goal that's achievable. So that's been a great that's been a great tool to use. And then athletes that are new to the sport, this one can be quite tricky for building and recovering, because often when an athlete is new to the sport, everything feels hard. And like Carly had kind of mentioned previously, when sometimes you're getting people who are in their 40s, 50s, who are just getting into fitness, getting into sport, getting into triathlon, it's all new to them. So kind of mixing up that periodization because they can't handle too much volume, or mixing it up because they're doing such low volume, the recovery isn't quite traditional to that 3 weeks of building, 1 week of recovery. Now, polarization of training. This is a big one for us. Really keeping hard days hard and easy days easy. We really want to make sure that we're hitting those nice big targets when we've got big numbers to hit, big intervals. And one way to do that is making sure easy days are easy. And with easy training, it's always been a tough one, I think, for a lot of athletes. We want to feel like we're always doing work. We want to feel like, we're always getting better. And sometimes that takes a bit of athlete education to understand we need easy to make sure the body can absorb the hard, and then we can get back to another hard day and get just as much quality out of it. So first, with keeping easy, wattage has been a great one here, because depending on wind and hills and other things we're going to talk about later, if we went off of pace or heart rate, running wattage, that could be tough to keep easy depending on the conditions, where if we focus on like zone 1 wattage or zone 2 wattage running, we can really keep them down closer to the floor and make sure they're not working too hard. Now, at Organic Coaching, we're based out of Michigan, and we have 2 camps a year. We have a summer camp and a winter camp. Summer camp is always in Michigan, some cool destination here. It's beautiful in the summer. Winter, we go somewhere down south and have a camp. And it's been a great opportunity because we have athletes come that, we work remotely. We don't really see our athletes. So this brings athletes in that we would never get to train with and have like a week with them. Now, I had an athlete in particular at 2019 camp. I'd been working with him for a while, and it was recovery days. It didn't matter if it was swim, bike, or run. It was always too hard. Every day, and we'll talk a little bit more about communication here in a bit, but my post-activity comment in Training Peaks was always like, you got to go easier. You got to go easier.
On repeat.
And like on repeat. Like it was just like, recovery day, I knew that's what I was going to have to say. And it's like, this athlete just could not wrap his mind around this. And at camp, we had a solid long run with some intervals in the morning. And then the afternoon, we had a coffee ride, as we call it. And coffee rides are super chill, zone 1, recovery. And we went out and did that coffee ride. He rode easy. I even made him go in the small chain ring. And ever since that, he understood how important it was to go easy. And it made a world of difference in his training, and which made his racing even stronger as well.
Yeah, it's like the light bulb clicked when you actually feel, maybe for the first time, what easy actually feels like.
And then one more note on polarization of training. Postmenopausal females, we have really implemented a strategy that truly separates hard days from easy days to help their bodies adapt better to training and stay stronger. And we have just had amazing results since implementing that. And then with periodization, we have a big emphasis on rest. So we're not really talking the sense in rest intervals in training. We're talking rest outside of training. We work with a lot of athletes who are kind of high-level professionals, and they only have so much time to train between family, marriage, work, career, all this stuff. And so let's say when they fill out that initial questionnaire, they say they have 90 minutes a day, 2 hours a day, whatever that may be. We're not always going to throw as much training as we can at that time, because with this schedule, rest is just as important. We need their body to absorb the training and make sure that they're able to get stronger and better. So we put a big emphasis on rest. Part of our education around organic coaching is helping the athlete understand why we can't use every free second for training, because we need the body to absorb the work they've done.
Absolutely. Yeah, so then we're going to head into adaptability. So really talking about the difference between the perfect plan maybe we have created as the coach versus the actual plan that happens sometimes. And they are not always the same. More often than not, they're not the same because life happens. We're human. So we'll dive into how we adapt training blocks, training weeks, and training days.
So we've got the perfect plan. We talked about, we build that annual macro plan for the year. We've got the blocks, we've got the races, and then we start implementing training, and then the real world happens. Unexpected work travel comes up. There's a loss in the family. There's a big life change. And what do we do as coaches in these situations to help keep the athlete on track, strong, and feeling like they're staying on track? Because we know with the changes we make, keep them on track. But sometimes when the athlete sees a change in plan, a decrease in volume, they might get a little discouraged. And a great example here is I work with an athlete who travels all over the world for work, and there's travel every month, and it's unexpected, and it's to another continent. He lives in North America, but it could be Europe, it could be Dubai, it could be South America, and usually it's 48 hours to 72 hours before is when he finds out it's going to happen. So we've got this perfect plan. He's training for a marathon or a 70.3. And all of a sudden we're getting on a plane, heading somewhere. And then 9 times out of 10, he's supposed to be there for 2 days, 3 days. Something else happens and he's stuck there for 2 weeks. So as a coach, it's my job to make sure I adapt the training to make sure he doesn't work too hard, he's not overstressed, and we're staying on track. This athlete, fortunate enough, he always packs bike shorts in case the gym has a nice bike we can ride. He's always got his running gear, and he's always got a little bit of swim gear, paddles and a pull buoy he takes. So whatever we've got when we get there, we can work with. An example that happened right before the pandemic, he had to fly to South America, and last minute, we were pretty deep in the build for a 70.3 at that time, maybe
it's like 10 weeks out.
Yeah, 10 weeks out. And he had to go down south. He had to work crazy hours, and we couldn't do what we had planned to do. So what we switched the mindset to was, well, let's maintain fitness. We're going to get these little chunks of training each day. And when we get back, we'll get back to work. So we're not going to worry about trying to put in this huge volume while you had to travel halfway around the world and work a ton of extra hours. We're going to focus on maintaining healthy levels. He's dealing with a lot of travel fatigue and a lot of work stress. So we just take Run Wattage, for example, and this athlete's very good at adhering to the plan. And we just dial everything back. So we drop the intensity a little bit, we drop the volume a little bit, and he's able to stay healthy. He's able to not be over fatigued. And then when he got back home, we were able to pretty quickly get right back into the training block, and we still achieved our goal on race day. And then we've got adapting a training week. These are the types of things that happen that are out of the control of an athlete, getting sick or dealing with some type of an acute injury. So with sickness, when someone starts to get a cold or get sick, we really like to shut training down quickly and have them focusing on getting healthy quickly. So, trying to train through sickness, we've never really had great luck with. The athlete might feel like they're getting something done, but we're only maybe we're recovering much slower in terms of the cold or whatever we have. And then we're dealing with, we're getting up to like 70%, 80% health, and we're just hanging there because we got to get our training in. So we like to shut the training down and push everything out a little bit if we can. So let's say, for example, if it's, 14, 16 weeks out from a race, that's great. Let's just focus on getting you healthy. We'll push the block a little bit, and we'll get back into training when you're healthy.
Yeah, and I love the phrase, you can't train a sick body. Yeah. Sometimes athletes that want to keep going, they want to push through, oftentimes they're afraid to tell you as the coach that they are sick because they know that you're going to back down their training. And so just letting them know, you can't train a sick body tends to kind of stick with an athlete, and they're like, you're right, this isn't worth fighting for and trying to get my training sessions in. So it's a good little phrase that we like to tell our athletes.
And then acute injuries, whenever that happens, we're always going to adjust the training. Working with primarily triathletes, we always have that fortunate tool of 3 sports, so we can mix things up to keep volume and intensity kind of where we want while whatever's going on heals. And we always suggest for the athlete to get into a specialist. We're not physical therapists. We're not medical doctors. We're not going to diagnose it, and we don't want them to self-diagnose. We want a professional to give them the correct diagnosis and the tools to get better.
Yeah.
And then we've got all the way down to the day. So a lot of our athletes train early in the morning. We're often training early in the morning. Not often. We always are. And so with that, we're not available. So like we had mentioned earlier, education was a big part of organic coaching, and we want athletes to know what to do when things go awry minutes, hours before a workout in case they can't reach out to their coach because we're not available. We want them to have the tools to understand what they need to do.
Yeah.
So lack of sleep, lack of time. If an athlete had a meeting run late the day before, up late working on a work project, a child was sick in the middle of the night, happens so often, and all of a sudden they're getting up at 4 or 5 in the morning to do their session, but they've only slept 3 or 4 hours. They know what to do. They know that decreasing intensity in intervals is the right way to go, or at least doing the warm-up and seeing how the body feels, making sure they're not stretching themselves too far, because they know that, maybe they could gut it through this session, but we're going to pay for that 2 or 3 days later if we're lacking on sleep or really stressed out. And then lack of time. That's something we all deal with sometimes. Especially if you're pushing a session to later in the day, things go in the day go wrong. They always do. Things don't go as planned. And next thing you know, you're supposed to have a 60-minute session, a 90-minute session. You've only got 45 minutes. And there, we put a big emphasis on doing what you can, not necessarily what the plan was. So making sure that, oh, well, I only have half the time to train, I'm just going to skip this one. No, let's use the time you have and get in what we can get in to build some fitness or maintain fitness, and the next day will be better.
Yeah, we always hit home that something is better than nothing.
Absolutely.
If you have 20 minutes, get out there and run for 20 minutes. So, okay. And then we're going to dive into our ongoing communication. As you know by now, communication is a big thing for us. So we set the expectations for communication right from the beginning. From the first week, we were working with an athlete. And so we use Training Peaks as our coaching platform. And in there's the area for post-activity comments. And we heavily utilize this. So I could be looking at a run file, an athlete uploaded it, and I'm like, they hit everything spot on. Their power was right on. It's a beautiful run file. I could be like, this looked great. But then they comment back and say, maybe they had a similar workout the week before and we were building off of it in our periodization. And they're like, it felt 20 times harder than it did the week before. I didn't sleep well last night and I have a super stressful project going on at work. And you're like, okay, now we can marry how you feel and the data, like Tyler said in his very beginning, taking the feel and the data and making the two really work well together. So that's why those post-activity comments is super, super important. So we want the athlete to let us know how they felt physically, how they felt mentally, and really any factors that might have affected the training session. Maybe the weather, maybe their sleep, maybe they had a lunch meeting and they had Indian food for lunch. And then they were supposed to do a 5 p.m. run that evening. They're like, my stomach felt horrible, right? And so those are things that we want to know as coaches, like what was affecting this? What was going on in your day to day? So like I said, right from the beginning, we really set those expectations for post-activity comments. And then, sometimes maybe they did an easy recovery run. There's not much to say. That's okay, but we don't want them to do that all the time where they're like, nothing to say, right? And then we we do our communication through Training Peaks and those post-activity comments. We dive into workouts Monday through Friday. We look at the data, see what's going on with our athletes. And then we also use an app called WhatsApp. And so basically like text messaging, but we use WhatsApp for everyone. Before that, we had some athletes email us, some athletes text us, some athletes send us Facebook Messenger messages, and like our communication was all over the place. And that's a really good way to drop the ball and not respond to someone, or a message gets lost. You're like, where did they say that? And you're looking at all these different areas. So really streamlining your forms of communications is super important. And so we use WhatsApp because then we also separate work from life. Our athletes don't send us personal like text messages because we also need to separate that. And especially coaches, you can be working around the clock 24/7. So we have a really strict like start and stop time through our days and our weekends. Our athletes know we'll respond if we can, but our weekends are also like our time to do our long rides and to spend time with our family. And so again, setting those communication expectations beforehand and as the athlete starts is super important. And then we do calls with our athletes. Sometimes it's over the phone. Sometimes it's through Zoom, especially with technology and older athletes. Sometimes we need to have a Zoom to help them set up their technology. Yes. And so we are face-to-face walking them through step by step. Or sometimes maybe it's a strength movement. They're like, I really don't know if I'm doing this right. Can we do a Zoom and make sure everything's appropriate so then they're not going to injure themselves as well. So those are the way that we really utilize communication. And then, like I said, just making sure that we can also separate work from life is super important and something that we've learned over the years. We were really, really bad at it for the first 5 years. And so we love what we do and feel so, so blessed to be able to coach full time. But it took us some time to figure out how to also have time for ourselves around that without also feeling guilty, right? So it's just been a big thing that we highly suggest to other coaches as well. Okay, and then onboard. That's really important to take you through the process of how we do this, and then this will also lead into how we set up Stryd and head into that with athletes as well. So when we bring an athlete on, we have them fill out a very lengthy questionnaire that we oftentimes apologize for before they fill it out, but it really lays down a strong foundation and helps us get to know the athlete. So we ask questions like, what technology do you have? What technology do you use? What kind of watch? Do you have a Stryd power meter? What kind of terrain do you have access to? Maybe they live in the flattest part of Florida and they have no hills to run, or maybe they live in the hilliest part of Colorado and there is no flat areas, right? So these are the kind of things that we want to know. And then we also ask a simple question of 1 to 5, how comfortable are you with technology? And then that gives us a really good idea as coaches of just where their comfort level is at, setting up new technology, being able to utilize technology in training, all those sorts of things. And then after that, we do an onboarding call. So as our coaches, they'll read through everything, start to compile questions. Maybe you need to know a little bit more information about X, Y, and Z. So then we have that onboarding call to really kind of go through any final things that we have questions about. And then we set up that first initial training block. So like Tyler said, for most athletes, that's going to be a 3-week build, 1-week recovery, depending on where the athlete is starting from. And with this first initial block, we're not even diving into data yet, really. We're going all by feel, all by RPE. This really lets us get to know where the athlete is at. The really only exception to that is if it's already a high-level athlete and they have years of data that we can kind of dive into, see where they're really at. But most athletes coming to us don't have that. So we start that initial training block all by feel, and this is really where we're just developing and deepening that athlete relationship, and we're really building that because that's what you're getting into. You're getting into a new relationship with someone. So then once we've done that first initial block of training, then we set our zones, swim, bike, run zones, our power zones, all that good stuff. So that testing and zone setting is usually about a week. And then we dive into the fun stuff, the targeted training. So we'll do a cycle, a couple cycles, whatever that looks like per athlete, but then we're diving into that targeted training. We're diving into power zones, whatever metrics that the athlete uses. And then we're retesting every 8 weeks or so. Again, so many differences per athlete, but we're retesting with either another test or if a race is coming up. And then the other important part is evaluating what is on target, what needs more help, what's going really well, what areas do we need to work on improving, and then we head back into our targeted training. And that cycle just continually repeats itself. So that's kind of that process of how we bring an athlete on and also get to know them as people, because that's what they are. We're working with people.
So then Stryd itself. We recommend Stryd for all of our athletes. Some athletes who come to us who are really into data might already have a Stryd, but oftentimes we find they're not really utilizing it to the best of its abilities. So
oftentimes like I have one.
Yeah,
yes.
A lot of times, a lot of athletes, they have all the things, but they don't really understand how to use it. So we implement that. We love Stryd for pacing, accuracy, and then additional metrics to measure training stress. So from any of the metrics in Training Peaks to the Stryd running stress score and running stress balance. Those are all aspects that we have found Stryd is great for. So then introducing Stryd to an athlete. First, we take into account their level of comfort with technology. So like Carly mentioned, that lengthy questionnaire, there is a question. How comfortable are you with setting up and using technology? And there's a little sliding 1 to 5 scale. So that gives us an idea. How much time are we about to invest in this athlete, helping them set up this? Or is this something that they'll be able to do on their own? Now, once the athlete has the device, we have them simply set it up correctly, making sure they set it up on their watch, which between our 4 coaches, almost every athlete is a Garmin user. So that process is pretty streamlined with the Connect IQ 2 store, downloading the correct Connect IQ app. So that's pretty simple. And then setting up on your phone, same deal, pretty simple. So once they have those set up correctly, everything ready to go, which can, depending on the athlete, it can take a couple steps, a Zoom call or two, but we get there and we have that all set up. Then we have them just train like normal. So we have they have the data field on their watch and they're running with Stryd, but we still have them train off the same metrics they have been training. We say, like, if you want to look at it and see kind of what numbers you're getting, that's great, but you don't need to, because we're not going to implement that yet. We don't really want you focusing on that aspect of data.
It's not a complete switch from whatever they're used to Stryd instantly. We take a slow approach to introducing Stryd.
We take a bit of a slow approach. And while that training block is going on, the coach takes a look at the data, what they're seeing, first to be able to validate and make sure this athlete has things set up correctly, and then for the coach to be able to see what changes they might see. One thing we do with every Stryd user is for outdoor runs, we still have distance based off GPS, but we have pace switched to Stryd, because if they live in a big city, if they're running in the forest, GPS can be a little wonky and pace is never quite accurate, but with Stryd it is. So even the coach is looking not just at power, but has cadence changed compared to when it was their arm moving back and forth? Has pace changed? Do I actually see higher, faster peaks and lower lows with recovery? What am I seeing changes here that we might be implementing in the next block? And now they've got that block done. Stryd has auto-calculated the zone. So the coach asks the athlete for their critical power in the Stryd app, and then the coach sets those zones and training peaks as well. And then going forward, we have it set up that whenever the athlete has a detected new critical, they let the coach know, and the coach makes those appropriate changes in training peaks.
Yeah, and everything is simple and easy and the same.
Absolutely. So Stryd has a ton of great uses, but for us, these have been some of our key takeaways. Pacing off the bike, controlling efforts in wind and hills, and then mindset blocks around pace, which has been a really big one.
Yeah.
So first, pacing off the bike. We work with athletes who do anything from a sprint triathlon, so 5K off the bike, to Ironman, so a marathon off the bike. And it doesn't seem to really matter what distance they're running off the bike. Everyone's really feeling a sprint pace. And that's great for a sprint, but for anything beyond that,
not so
good. We're gonna burn out, and we're not gonna have a fantastic run. So Stryd really helps reel in the athlete. Instead of saying we're looking for this heart rate or we're looking for this pace, we're gonna simplify it and say we're looking for this wattage number. So hills, wind, it doesn't matter. They're going to dial it in, focus on this one number. So if it's a hilly run off the bike, well, we don't get hooked on pace. We get hooked on a wattage to simplify things and keep everything even, and the athlete having a strong run. And it keeps them also really reeled in coming off the bike, which really helps on the back end of any of those event distances. Yeah. And then with power, it takes into account a lot of factors that pace or heart rate wouldn't. So it's just been a fantastic tool off the bike. And then controlling effort. So we found coaching draws a lot of type A athletes, which I think we could define ourselves as well.
Yes.
And these athletes, they have a need for everything to be quantified. So they want to be able to see that they did work. They want to be able to see that they are doing better. And that's exactly what Stryd helps with. Whether it's wind, hills, or intervals, Stryd is going to help. And a great example for the wind is I have an athlete that lives in way out in the country. It's just straight, flat roads. And so every run is an out and back, no matter what he wants, because there's really only one way to go for pretty much anything up to 2 hours. And so oftentimes we're dealing with a headwind on the way out or the way back, depending if he goes left or right out of the driveway. And now if we were to set those runs to pace, that headwind could burn him out, and we're not going to be able to hit the goal pace on those runs because the wind is too much work, and the athlete's going to end that run. He has ended that run feeling defeated and like he's not getting better. When we switch to wattage, we get a much more even pacing. We're able to quantify the work, and then the athlete isn't struggling or burning out on the back end of that. We're finishing strong how we wanted to. And then it's also a great tool for hills, helps normalize everything, looking at wattage instead of focusing on pace or heart rate. And then intervals. We know if anyone here has done running intervals using heart rate lags behind. When we do wattage intervals, we're able to say, boom, we're shooting for this wattage, and then we're recovering at this wattage, and we're shooting for this wattage. And it makes
so the hard is hard and the easy is easy.
So it makes for really strong intervals.
Yeah. And then those mindset blocks around pace. So what we see as coaches over our years has been this element of mindset blocks. So we'll have athletes that maybe come to us that, again, talking about that 30, 40, 50, 60-year-old that has never really been active at all in their life. And then they start to get better. They're starting to see that they're running faster and they're feeling great. And then they start looking ahead in their training and they have an interval run later that week. And they're like, I can't run an 8-minute pace. You want me to run an 8-minute pace? You're crazy. They're like, I'm not that fast. And they've already started telling themselves this narrative that they are not that fast and that they can't run that pace. And to that, I always tell athletes, I would not prescribe you that if I knew you couldn't do it. I would not give you that to fail. But then they go do that workout, and of course they didn't hit the 8-minute pace that they were prescribed because they have already decided that they can't do it. So taking out that element of pace has been really, really good for us and for our athletes, and saying, here is your target number. They see that wattage number and it just instantly feels much more doable and manageable for athletes. And they say, oh, I can go run that. Yeah, I can go hit that. And then they do, and they go amazing. And then we look on the back end of things and we say, yeah, you ran an 8-minute pace, or maybe you ran a little bit faster. So we've seen that be super, super helpful for athletes that don't see what they are truly capable of doing, and they see these faster paces and they get nervous. And then when athletes will say, well, I don't want to let you down and I don't think I can do this. It's just really a really good way of just taking that element completely out of the equation. And we found that athletes just respond a lot better around mindset and pace. And then the same thing with recovery. We've already kind of talked about this, but it helps reel athletes in. We like to see the fast paces on our watch. Let's be real, right? And so it's hard, like we've already talked about, to go easy enough on our easy runs. So if on our watches, we just run, we don't even show how fast we're running, but we're just running power, it can help reel athletes in. And we just say, don't go above X, Y, and Z power. Go out, enjoy your run, have fun. Has been a lot better than go run a 10-minute pace. And like, I don't want to go run a 10-minute pace. My marathon effort is an 8 or a 7:45 or something like that. And then, like, you know, I don't, it's hard to see. I don't want to do that. So just the mindset block around pace either way has been really helpful, just to take that out of the equation and input power instead. And then triathletes versus runners. So as coaches over the years, we have seen triathletes really embrace power, running with power, over our runners. They already understand power on the bike. That's what we try to use most athletes as like our number one metric on the bike is power. So then they're used to that and it just kind of makes sense. Well, it's not the same. It's not the same in a lot of ways, but they're already used to power on the bike. So then they just naturally adapt to power on the run. And it's a pretty smooth transition for most triathletes.
Now, runners, we have had a bit of a different experience. If high-level runner, collegiate, maybe they've already down some faster times, and they're really honed into pace or RPE running. It's hard to get them to kind of hook onto this metric of power running. And a lot of times they're really resistant to it. So what I've done is first I say, okay, well, you know, we run with pace and you live in the city, you live in the country, there's GPS interference and we don't get the most accurate data all the time for pace. So let's get Stryd because it is like the best foot pod for pace. And let's throw that on, change some settings. So we're always looking at pace from the Stryd, and let's start using it there and just we'll have a good pacing tool. And then, of course, I have them set it up properly so I'm still seeing power on training peaks. And then I start making little correlations like, hey, I noticed, you're doing this wattage on level, but on hills you're doing this wattage, and maybe that's why this last interval wasn't that great, because this hill kind of threw us off. When you were supposed to do in recovery, you ran too hard up that hill. We could instead XYZ do this wattage here and make sure that we still hit that interval at pace. And I start adding in these little nuggets of information about how Stryd can actually help them. And then we start to build into it more and more. And my ultimate goal, like I said initially, that balance between feel and numbers. I'm able to get these pure runners to use Stryd as one more tool to help them execute their absolute best race, which is what we want. So we may not be able to get them to completely switch over to as much power running as we would like, but we can get them to keep that metric in their back pocket and understand when I'm in these situations, I should focus more on power or less on power. And then when they race, same deal. We have a lot of athletes that do races in destinations far from their home. And this way, this tool can really help them meter their effort and have a strong race.
Yeah, and I think over time, and the more we draw those correlations to it, they do start to kind of like it more and more, and trust the running with power over pace.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, so we've got a couple questions, and this one particularly asking about heart rate, threshold, power, and pace zones for long distance on the bike, and the run also. For Ironman, from sprint to Ironman and beyond, is there a way of doing this for run power? So yeah, I read this as when you, for example, have bike power zones, heart rate zones, threshold zones, you do that through testing. So you go through the protocols, for example, like let's say like a 20-minute FTP test, and therefore we're able to get threshold, power, and heart rate. Now on the run, there's a couple ways, but we really like critical power through the Stryd app. So I would suggest doing that with a athlete to have them set their zones for running, because power zones running and power zones biking are two different sets of numbers, and the zones don't line up and correlate. So we want to make sure we have separate sets of zones for those.
Yeah.
And then can we use bike FTP levels and parameters to guide athletes on the run in the same way? If not, what adjustments do we make up or down? And then, for example, 100% of FTP for 50 to 60 minutes an hour on the bike equates to what level of critical power over the same duration? So this kind of piggybacks off that last one.
Yeah, so run and bike power are two
different,
completely different things. And so you'll have to get the bike power, so the FTP, from an FTP test specifically. And then, like Tyler said, we get our run power from the critical power from the Stryd power meter.
Yep. And I would say the efficiency of the runner's Stryd, their ability level, and their ability to run smooth at easy paces and hard paces all affect what their running power is. So really just making sure you test the run power, test the bike power separately, and have separate sets of zones.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a couple more.
Yep.
How do you define easy days? So this is a great example. Clearly, we have talked lots about easy and how much of an emphasis we put on recovery and rest and all of that. So there's a couple different things that come to my mind quickly about this. So easy days is going to be a zone 1 run, and it's not going to be that long. So like one of our favorite recovery runs is like a run walk interval or 30 minutes all zone 1. And then piggybacking off of that would be like if it's a triathlete, an easy spin that same day, again, zone 1, or a super easy swim in the pool. So doing some paddle pull buoy work. And or also that same day, we're putting a big emphasis on stretching, rolling, mobility. This is your full day to rest and recover and let the body truly absorb all of the work that has been done. So one athlete in particular that comes to my mind is one of my runners. And so he has a pretty big weekend, because like most athletes, his weekends, he has more time to dedicate towards training naturally. And so our Mondays are purely all about recovery. Like I said, he does either a run walk interval a lot of times, because that walk interval is so important to help reset posture and truly keep that lower intensity on those days. And then as soon as he's done, or in the evening, he will do a yoga session. And he has a yoga routine, stretching routine, basically, that he really loves and actually enjoys doing. And it has been a struggle to get him to that point. But we are 4 years in, and he is embracing those Mondays, truly allowing that body to recover. And then on Wednesdays, when we do intervals, he is feeling alive again and ready to go. Do you have any examples of?
No, I think those were all great examples, really. For pretty much any recovery session, though, we definitely set a ceiling. Like, they can only go so hard, so fast, so much wattage, and really hard and fast aren't even words that are used on those days.
Yeah. And kind of like we've hit on before, like, it takes time for some athletes to truly embrace easy days and to really learn what that feels like, especially starting with new athletes. We are constantly reining them in. We're like, slower, easier, slower, easier. And usually, like I said, 4 years in, we have athletes fully embracing that now and truly understanding and getting faster. They are now running to their true ability and continuing to get faster as they age, because we're allowing the body to absorb the hard work that's being put in.
We're making sure that by doing this, they're not gray zoning it. They're not always in that sort of hard range. They're in easy or hard a lot of the times, which really creates that polarization and recovery.
Yeah. I think there's one more question. So on the flip side, how do you define hard days? And so hard days for us is going to be like zone 3 and above, right? So zone 3, 4, and 5, whether we're doing some tempos, some intervals on the bike, running, or in the pool, it doesn't matter. So that zone 3 and above. And on these same days, we're polarizing those days. So on hard days, we're going to do maybe a hard interval run, and then we're going to back that up with their strength work. We're in the gym, we're lifting heavy, so that those hard days as a whole are hard, and then those easy days are super easy. So for us, again, hard is going to be zone 3 and above. Our interval days, our tempo days, and backing that up, it might be a run and a bike, or a run and a swim. It's kind of nice to do a run and a swim on the same day. So then we are still getting that low impact for the body to not break down too much. But like I said, those hard interval days are also really, really good days to get in the gym and lift heavy, because strength training is equally as important as everything else that we do as athletes.
Yeah. And for longer, harder sets, that zone 3 above, it's often pretty targeted with a number, a pace, a wattage, a heart rate. Now with the really short end of hard, really quick, only a couple second repeats, we're often reaching for RPE, rating perceived exertion, because we want them to just hit what max is in that moment, not maybe what a data device says or conditions say. Oftentimes, there's always examples that can go both ways for things like this, though.
Yeah, even for those super short intervals, if it's 20, 30 seconds, saying, hey, try to get above this number. So sometimes we say, this is what we want you to hit on the low end, but try to get above this.
And that's those are things we might hit with athletes sometimes, that they're not really great at hurting or used to that really hard feeling. So we'll say, hey, get at least above this. I know you can get above this. And setting that parameter can really help them get there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's it. Yes.
Yeah, amazing. I want to ask one thing really quickly. When did you start introducing the concept of ceilings and floors? Because I think that's one of the descriptive ways that coaches can pass guidance onto athletes. So you can give a target, or you can give a range, but just using a simple word like a ceiling or a floor, it helps them understand and connect that sort of reference with their actual goal in practicality.
Yeah, I think, I mean, we probably maybe right around when we started coaching full time and we're truly fully immersed in it, we started seeing the differences even deeper in more athletes, the more experience we had with athletes, kind of how these terms and ideas helped them reach the best version of themselves training and racing.
Yeah, so I mean, probably close to like 2016-ish is when we really kind of figured that out, right? The longer you do anything, the better you get at it and the more you learn. So probably around 2016 is when we really kind of found like, oh, this is really good. Athletes are responding really well to this. And it just makes things a whole lot simpler. Like we can't ask someone to remember a million different numbers, but we could ask them to remember one or two, right? So it simplifies things for sure.
Exactly. Well, I want to say thank you. We just crossed a little bit over the hour mark. This has been a great webinar. It seems like time flies by when you're engrossed in a subject, and it just is super fascinating. This will be available as replay for any coaches in the Stryd coaching group. If any coaches want to contact you and ask any follow-up questions or kind of, shoot the breeze about some of these subjects, where's the best place to contact you, provided that they understand that you also have a bunch of athletes that you have to contact via WhatsApp at the same time. But what is a better place to learn more about both of you and your coaching?
Yeah, absolutely. So the best place is going to be to send us an email, and that is support@organiccoaching.biz, so .biz, or Instagram, that's organic.coaching, is where we are very, very frequently. But yeah, we would love to help answer any questions or talk about anything
100%.
for anyone that has questions.
Fantastic. Well, Tyler and Kelly, thank you so much again for coming on. We look forward to sharing this out to all of our Stryd coaches, and we wish you the best of success in coaching in this 2021. I want to say it's a new year, but we're already almost to April, so not so much a new year. But thank you again so much, and we look forward to the next one.
Yeah, thank you. Have a good one.